Yeah,
Yeah.
there we go. Okay. Whoa, technology.
We got it.
Okay, go ahead, Michelle, and I'll click if you need.
Okay, everyone, thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning. Today we're going to have a little webinar session learning more about sustainable gardening with succulents with Jennifer Ahlstrand. Just to get started, we'll go over a few housekeeping stuff about how we're going to go about this webinar. So next slide.
Okay.
And today, all attendees are muted by default. The instructor Jennifer will periodically pause to ask for questions. We encourage you to participate and ask questions. So either in your little Q&A window or your participant list, you can raise your hand, and that will indicate that you will like to speak or have a question. Or you can type in a little Q&A box any questions you might have, and we'll go over them when we have a good stopping point. Or if you just have like a quick one-off question, like maybe Jennifer mentioned a website and you wanted to know what that website, you can be monitoring it and also entering answers as we go along. So feel free to ask as many questions you like and participate. Additionally, the webinar will be recorded and it's going to be available on a Bosco website after this session, and also I believe it'll be emailed to you as well once we're done. Next slide. Oh, there you go. I told you how to raise your hand.
And the Q&A.
There you go.
You do that. Okay.
Okay, so about Bosco, this webinar session is hosted by the City of Hayward, but also sponsored by Bosco, which is an agency that represents 26 water agencies, water districts, and companies that purchase water within the San Francisco regional water system. The member agencies, including the City of Hayward, provide over 1.1 million people and over 40,000 businesses in this community in Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties. And our goal at Bosco is to provide high quality of water at a fair price. And next slide. So in the Bosco's landscaping class that we're hosting now, our program objectives is to target that outdoor water usage, which we have identified as one of the single largest untapped opportunities for water conservation within this Bay Area. And also with outdoor water use reductions, we can use these innovative techniques and tools that we have, including this class as well, to help conserve water and ensure that future water supplies and needs of our communities are met. Additional ways to save. The idea that we have with hosting these classes is that you can take some of the stuff you learn and apply in your own garden or home. And City of Hayward has some water conservation programs ongoing to help you with that. We do have a lawn conversion rebate program still ongoing, and the rain barrel rebate program as well. We have additional information for other rebate programs on our website linked down on this slide, or you can contact me. That's my email address, and I can provide you also more additional information. An additional resource as well is this bayareagardening.org website. I believe it's the Water Wise website. It just provides resources to support residents in water efficient landscape renovations and management, including plant collection tools and watering calculators. So if you wanted to go ahead and do your own lawn conversion rebate or build a more sustainable landscape in your home, this is definitely a good guide for you to check out after this session. Okay. And also I want to recommend some more upcoming webinars that we have. Another one that's happening or being hosted by the City of Hayward is a leak detection check and water efficient gardening webinar, which is going to be hosted on Halloween of all times. So once you're stuck inside and nothing else to do, definitely check that out as well. And there's also more upcoming fall classes listed down below and on that website, bayareaconservation.org. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer, who can tell you more about her lovely garden array, which you see here and in her background. So I'll just leave it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name's Jennifer. My business is called Westwind Succulents. I started growing succulents about 5 years ago on a windy rooftop in West Oakland. So that's where I got my name. Before that, I worked at Macy's for 7 years doing the window display in Union Square, and that was great fun. I went to art school, and majored in painting and sculpture, so it was a great use of my skills, but still wasn't really satisfying my need. I always wanted to work for myself, so about 6 years ago now, I took the plunge and quit and started doing freelance artwork. That's when I started growing succulents on that rooftop and found that that's all I wanted to do was be with my plants. So I started creating art with my plants, and here we are. So these are some of the things that I do. I teach a lot of classes with like crafting with succulents, obviously lectures on planting and gardening with them. I also do a lot of wedding floral with succulents incorporated and small scale landscape. And here's a picture of my nursery. And then I'm also in the nursery, happens to be today. So here I am in Lafayette. And with that said, let's get started. Oh, and my website's on the bottom. Feel free after the class if you have questions about anything. I don't mind helping with questions. You can also follow me on Instagram. It's where I share a lot of the pretty things and tips and things like that. So that's a little more interactive. So yeah, here we go. Landscaping with succulents. These are some great designs that I love. So first, I'm just going to kind of talk about elements of successful landscape design, because I feel like that's a lot of times where you're going to want to start out is thinking about how things are going to look, right? Because I feel like this is all about visual interest, right? This is about seeing things and being around things that make us happy. So might as well make it look great, right? So these are some of the things that I think about when designing with succulents. You want a balance of and variation of color, texture, sizes, and shapes. These elements should create good movement, which is the placement of your plants and how it dictates your eye moving through the garden. You'll often hear about saying things like, this is how it flows, or how your eye flows through the space, or how you flow through the space as well. So first thing to think about is color. So this is a great example of awesome color. Although this is a pretty restricted color palette, it's still extremely powerful. These colors really speak to each other. Something I like to think about when working with colors is what I call a bridge color. So this is just the color that kind of brings two colors together. So for example, you have this really bright yellow and this really bright blue, and see how this great kind of darker grass and then this darker blue, they kind of bridge that gap between just two completely opposite colors, and it makes it blend and all look nice together. So that's something to think about too. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing just really bright and fun too. These are all suggestions, just like art, you know, it's all a matter of opinion and taste. So you can take this part with a grain of salt with all of my artistic suggestions. So textures and shapes. This is another great example. These little sedum are fine and delicate and soft, and then it contrasts nicely with a bigger, sharper aloe or agaves that are just very like rigid and more geometric, if you will. So I like mixing those together. And then movement and grouping. The placement of your plants dictates how your eye moves through the garden, as I just said. This one is amazing because there's not a lot of plants, so the placement is almost even more important, right? So these are staggered really nicely. They're not in a straight line. They look very organic, right? They almost look like you just happened upon it in the desert, and that's what was just transported into their front yard. So I think that that's great. You have rocks mixed in, which also helps movement, right? You have different heights, all really successful. And then this is another example how this kind of creates a nice flow through here with the rocks. You have some focal points, and it kind of moves almost like a river. Here's some examples of things that I would be critical of, and I'll tell you why. I'm not like, I wouldn't say that this is necessarily great landscape design. So the problem for me with this one is, although you have a good mixture of shapes and textures, it's very crowded, and it's also very stripy. You have a big, where's my mouse? There we go. You have a big swath of the aeonium here, and then this other aeonium here, and then you have this agave right here that is just kind of creating a stripe. It's just kind of boom, boom, boom. It doesn't look natural. And then the other problem, I would even like trim away a bunch of these aeoniums to let your agave really show through and kind of break up that hard line and make it more organic looking. With this one, I would say that the rocks really are distracting. It's kind of like the first thing you see rather than the plants. You'll have this agave surrounded by big rocks. It doesn't look very natural. And again, this is just my taste. I tend to do things more like organic and natural, like how you would find it in nature. Some people really like doing things in straight lines, and that's fine too. I think there are ways to do that successfully, but this just, I think you don't see the plants, right? That, and I think that's like what the main objective is to enjoy your plants. So all I see is rocks. And then for this one, I would say that these rocks used are way too big. So talking about scale, they almost look like they're a succulent as well. And it's a little distracting. And I don't think it's necessary. So just little, I was trying to come up with examples of like do's and don'ts. So those I would say are don'ts. So talking about size and height, covered that a little bit, but this is amazing. There's a lot of color, which is great, but it's well balanced. You have some bigger things mixed with smaller things, which is great. It's not all just like one sea of all of the same size of plants. And then you have this nice euphorbia in here to break up and have something nice and tall and a different height. And then with this, when you think about size and height, you really want to take into consideration your backgrounds, your backdrops. So obviously here, the backdrop is this fence, which is lovely. It's a great natural color. There's still plenty of depth of this in this bed to play with different heights. So you can see how it's great to put the tall things in the back and the shorter things in the front, so that you're not hiding anything. You're not blocking something really cool from being seen at all, and block it from getting light is another thing to think about. But yeah, just great. Like this just has great differentiation in color, textures. It's kind of got all the things you want in that garden. Some other things to consider are focal points or vignettes, or sometimes I call them little moments. So a lot of times when I'm designing a yard, I pick a few places that are going to be kind of like the star of the show, right? Like where you're really going to focus. Like for example, in this photo, this fountain is a really nice focal point. Your eye kind of starts there, and then you begin to notice all the things around it, right? So that's great. And then even these agaves are kind of, I would consider those focal points because they're so powerful and striking. Other ways to do this are having a really nice, beautiful pot with something very powerful in that. Like I do that a lot with like really special succulents, like maybe like a Medusa. Euphorbia Medusa is very, very interesting. So it's nice to kind of let those plants that you have stand on their own, right? So you can let it not be busy around it and just kind of be its own thing, and then have other things around it. Other ways to create interest is by using rocks. They're interesting as well as they make your succulents happy. Succulents naturally grow in and around rocks, most of them. So having a rock nearby is a really great way to make it look natural. And if you had something small, that'll kind of help shield it from the sun a little bit if it was shorter than the rock. And we'll talk more about light soon, but that's something to consider. Another fun thing to think about is your front yard versus your backyard. Sometimes I like to think of the front yard as kind of a more formal garden, right? I kind of think of it like when you're meeting someone for the first time or going to work, you kind of put your nicer clothes on. And you know, it's a way to just kind of like show the world what you like, what you're into. Um, and then also think about what you want to see. Like, what do you want to see every day when you come home, right? You want it to be like really nice and pretty and happy. Versus the backyard, maybe that's where you spend more time. It's more functional. You can experiment more. Oftentimes you have more space in the back. So just things like that, I think are fun to consider. Oh, another thing is be safe with spikes. I can't tell you how many times people will plant something really cool but really spiky, like really close to a pathway or close to a door or just even close to like your hose bib. Just anywhere where you're going to be moving around a lot, I would recommend putting spiky things away from that, because some of them are pretty nasty, although awesome. But just be careful. And then another thing that I think is sometimes hard to do is remove things that aren't working in your yard. So a lot of times if you're dealing with an existing landscape and you want to kind of either add succulents or, you know, just do something different, it's great to work with what you have. I definitely am not an advocate of like just mowing down your whole yard and starting over, especially if you have some great plants in there. But don't be afraid to take things out that, you know, are struggling or unhealthy, or you just don't like them. Do that first, take them out, and you'll have a more clean palette to start with. Yeah, so don't be afraid of that. And if it's succulents, definitely don't throw them away. Put them on Nextdoor or Craigslist and give them away because they propagate super easily. Okay, oops. Another thing to think about are companion plants. So I love mixing beautiful trees in. I like these trees because they are pretty drought tolerant once they're established, which is good and what we want. They also aren't super thick, so they have a nice kind of airy branch system and leaves. And that will allow a lot of good light to come through to your succulents, but it'll also protect them a little bit from getting blasted all day with sun, which a lot of succulents don't want all day sun. And we'll talk about that more too. So here's a beautiful acacia and a Circidium called Desert Museum. This one is very, very lovely. And then dwarf eucalyptus, which is great. There's a lot like eucalyptus sometimes get a bad rap. There's a lot of different kinds and they look wonderful with succulents. Some other things I like to use are grasses, always grasses. They have a great texture that a lot of times contrasts to succulents. They're very fine. Also when the wind blows, they look wonderful. They move really well. And there's all different sizes and shapes, and they're very drought tolerant for the most part once they're established also. Protea are also great. They originate in South Africa, so they're very drought tolerant. The only thing to be careful with these is to not fertilize your soil if you're going to use these. They like very, very poor soil, nutrient void soil. But they're, as you can see, amazing. They're also called pincushion plant. You might know them as. And then shrubs. Shrubs are great, especially Arctostaphylos. This is our native manzanita. Again, there's lots of kinds of manzanita as well, and I recommend using those. They're very beautiful, and again, like things with this like powdery blue tend to look so good with succulents since there are a lot of succulents that have that color in their leaves. Okay, are there any questions after that? Before I get into more of the care of succulents?
It doesn't look like they have any questions yet.
Okay, great. So, getting to know succulents. So, defined only by the water stored in their leaves, succulent plants have a tremendous variety of colors, textures, growth habits, and forms. Ease of propagation, drought tolerance, and low maintenance requirements make these plants the perfect choice for practically everybody. They want to live. They naturally grow in incredibly unforgiving climate, so they have found ways to ensure their survival. They're very forgiving and perfect plant for the beginning gardener. I always recommend this to anyone who's just getting into plants. That's what happened to me. I just started propagating them and realized how easy it was to propagate them, how forgiving they were. And a great thing about them using in gardens, you can move them easily, right? If you, unlike other plants where if you disturb established roots, they're very sensitive. A lot of times succulents won't care and you can easily just uproot them and move them around. Also, like I was saying before, sharing is great. You can oftentimes like cut just a chunk off and you'll be able to root them in your yard. I actually have I had in my mother-in-law's yard, one of those smooth agaves. Probably see them around. They can get really, really big and they have pups. And there was a very, very big one that was starting to grow into the driveway. Well, I literally just sawed it off, removed some leaves, and planted it in the ground in my friend's yard. And now it's happy and going strong and it's amazing. So basically the point is play with them. Practice, just experiment with them, see what happens. I'm sure you'll find you'll be pleasantly surprised. So with that said, about propagating, these are the most common methods. Like I was saying, cuttings. You can also divide them. So like, for example, an aloe that might have a bunch of pups or different clusters, you can pull them apart and then plant those separately. That's like the same as harvesting pups. There's also seedlings and plantlets and then leaf propagation. But cuttings are one of the easiest and fastest way to propagate. So this is an example of one of my propagating trays where I just use a nursery tray and I fill it with about 50% perlite and 50% soil and just stick cuttings in and water about once a week. And they root pretty quickly. And then I take them out and plant them in different pots. Here's another fun way that these guys like to reproduce is there's a lot of varieties that are usually called mother of millions varieties where they grow little babies on the tips of their leaves. And these actually will just fall off into the soil below and start growing. You can kind of see a little baby right at the base of this. So those are amazing. And then these are great. I discovered this Crassula tetragona. The tips right about here, if you just barely touch them, the tips will just fall off. And it's their way of figuring out how to propagate. So I'm sure in the wild where they figured if an animal walked by and brushed it, it would do the work for them and help to propagate and grow more babies. So it's pretty cool. So yeah, they want to live. They'll find a way. So here's what I was talking about, dividing pups. So this is a beautiful aloe with all of these little babies. So all I did was gently pull apart. You try to get as many roots to come with it as you can, but even if you don't get any roots, you can probably still get it to grow. Here's another example of more aloe. These were aloe that a friend brought me that she found on Craigslist. And the stem was really, really long, so it was hard to fit in a pot. And I just cut the root in half so it would fit in a 1 gallon pot, potted a bunch of them up, and now I have a bunch of really beautiful aloe. Here is the ever popular leaf propagation. So you can see here, these are just different leaves and they will actually grow little rosettes on the tips of them like this. So it's pretty awesome. The only thing you need to do for this is make sure whatever leaf you have is fully intact. So when you peel it from the stem of something, it doesn't break or tear. And not all succulents will propagate like this, but like most echeveria, sedivaria, some sedums, anything where the leaf is a little bit plump and snaps off easily, it'll probably root. If you're not sure, try it, but yeah, not all will do it. Also, it takes a lot longer than doing cuttings. So sometimes I don't quite have the patience for this, but this is one of my trays. I have so many left over from when I do bouquets and things where I'm taking leaves off to create stems that I'll just kind of throw them in a pot and hope that some of them make it. So it's fun. So I recommend trying it at the very least. because why not? Okay, so another thing to know is what healthy roots look like. So healthy roots are generally firm, sometimes fuzzy or hairy, bright, and always trim away any dead or mushy or like dry, crispy roots. So if you're repotting something or potting something into the ground, make sure and kind of look and give it a nice clean out, and like clean any dead leaves off too. A lot of people think that if they leave kind of dead stuff around in the soil or on top of the soil, that it's almost like mulch. It's not, especially if it's like rotted. That's very bad. Anytime you have any rotted plant material, get it away from your healthy plants. Okay. So let's talk about soil. So it's just really important to have well-draining soil. This is a way you can test your soil and see how fast it drains. Like dig a hole and put a tape measure on there, and like kind of there's equations to see online that you can Google that are like, to see how fast is fast enough. Basically, you want to have visibly noticeable drainage. Like you want to be able to actually see it start to go down, and that's how you know you have good drainage, because succulents are very prone to rotting. So you don't want that. So ways that you can amend that is you can get like good topsoil. You can also mix in lava rock. This is my preferred mixture for landscaping. It looks better in the ground. You can also do pumice, but pumice is definitely better for in pots. It has a little bit more nutrients in it. So if something's in a pot for a long period of time, whenever you water, the water will pass through that pumice and it will release nutrients. So that's a little bit better for that. There's some really good mixtures you can buy a little bit further north of you guys in Contra Costa County. There's what is it called? Contra Costa Soil, I believe, and they have a succulent blend that's great. Also perlite. A lot of times you will find perlite when you buy cactus mixes. I don't love it. It doesn't have any nutrients in it. What it actually is super heated and popped pumice. So it's like once it goes through that process, it's kind of void of nutrients anymore. The other reason I don't like it in the ground is because it's so light that it over time will float to the surface. And that's not good and not helpful. What I use it for, and I think what a lot of probably large scale nurseries use it for, is for growing plants, like growing, like producing plants. So I use it for my cuttings. So if you really want to get into propagating, I would recommend buying a big bag of that and mixing that with like a good potting soil or succulent soil. And I usually mix about like 40% perlite to 60% soil. And what that does is it keeps the soil from compacting. So when you have little tiny new baby roots shooting out, that's what you want. You really want a light, fluffy soil so that it's easy for them to push through, right? Rather than a really compacted, dense soil mixture. So that's the only thing I use that for. Okay. Any questions after that?
Yeah, we do have a few questions.
Okay.
One question is, how do you cut back on succulents if they get too tall?
Oh, that's a great question. It kind of depends on the shape of it, but I would say just anywhere that looks good to you, really. I mean, I would take, let's say you had like a really tall piece and your rest of your pieces are shorter, just cut it level with the other pieces, chop it off, peel off some leaves to give yourself a stem, and then try propagating it. You're not wasting that cutting. But yeah, don't be afraid to just kind of cut things to make them the shape that you want. Or, if they're overgrowing other plants, just trim them. Trim them, give them away, or trim them and put them in a pot. Does that answer that question okay, hopefully? It kind of depends on the plant. If you want to, send me a picture and I'll give you a more specific answer.
There you go.
Yeah.
Another question is, how would you propagate trailing succulents?
Oh yeah, that's a little trickier. So I'm assuming you mean like a string of pearls or a string of dolphins. Let's see, I'm like, I might even be able to go grab one. One second. Let's see. So here's a really great string of pearls, and they're a little tricky to when I like even for me to propagate. So what I would do is I'll actually do this. I don't have clippers, but I'm just going to peel off a piece like this. And there are two ways I kind of do this. It's a little bit painful, but you want to create a stem, right? Because if you bury all of these little balls, they're just going to rot. So what I would probably do is peel off gently, or you could use little scissors, all these little balls and give yourself a good little stem. And then I would stick the stem in the soil, so I at least have something down deep in there. And then I would go ahead and although this looks lovely trailing down, and if I were doing like a custom arrangement or something for a gift, I would probably just leave it like this because I want something trailing off. But if you want to just make more and make a healthy plant by itself, I would then take this and kind of lay it around, hopefully you can see this, lay it around like the top of your pot. And that way, let's see if you can see this, because look at, if you can see this, there's a bunch of little roots already growing off of these stems, right? So if you stick this in and then lay this around, these are gonna, all those little roots are gonna start going down. And then you'll have a nice, thick, healthy plant with all of these little guys, and then they'll start to trail over time once it gets happy and healthy. Hopefully that answers that. Anything else?
Okay, that's all we have for now. Everyone, feel free to, if some people just joined, feel free to pop in any questions in the Q&A section and we'll go over it when we can.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, great. Okay, so watering succulents. The general rule of thumb is to water once per week. In pots, you want to make sure you're watering deeply enough for water to actually run out the drainage hole. And then you want to wait for the soil to completely dry before you water again. So the reason that you do that, a lot of people think you can just put in an ice cube or just mist it, but they're not air plants. They don't absorb water through the skin. They absorb water through their roots. So when you're watering, you want to make sure it runs out the bottom because you want to make sure all of those roots are getting water. Because if you're only drizzling here, only these roots are getting water. All of these roots are suffering and it won't grow properly. The roots will start growing up instead of going out and down. And that goes for the ground too. You want them to go nice and deep and wide instead of like staying at the surface. So yeah, so same for in the ground, once a week is good in hot summer months, and then definitely reduce the amount you water in the winter or in colder months. So a lot of succulents actually go dormant during the winter, so they're not actively growing. So it's even more important to not water them too much. I wouldn't say never, but like even in my nursery, I probably water, depending on like how dark and how cold it's been, every few weeks, every once a month. It kind of depends on like the size of pots they're in, but like, so I would say in ground, definitely just reduce it a lot. Just kind of watch them. If they look like they're getting a little dry, have some dry leaves, getting a little shrivelly, go ahead and water them. But it's just something to be aware of, is to not rot them because they're just super slowed down. Drip systems are the best, most efficient way to water. So these are very drought, like I said, drought tolerant plants, but they do need watering. So where other plants you might have to water every couple of days, succulents, like I said, at the hottest, usually once a week is good. Fall, every 2 weeks, winter, every month. So you really are saving huge amounts of water by using succulents and drought tolerant things. You can easily have someone install a drip system for you, or if you have a small area, you can use a little sprinkler or even hand watering. I really like using a water wand. It sprinkles the water gently. You don't want to spray really harshly if you use the hose. Don't use one of those guns that are like, one setting. Even the ones that have different settings, I find even their shower setting is still too harsh. I would definitely get one of those long water wands with the nice round head. You want your water to sprinkle gently for two reasons. You don't want the hard water to damage your succulents, to bruise them, to knock leaves off. Also, you're going to waste a lot of water that way because it's going to bounce off the succulents, bounce off rocks, and when it drips gently, it's just going to nicely soak into the ground. That's what you want. I also like hand watering. Even if you have a drip system, I recommend every once in a while hand water. It's a good way to kind of spend time with your plants and see if something's not getting watered. Like, you might not notice if maybe one of your drips is clogged until you're out there spending time hand watering yourself. And so that's a good way to like look for problems, is to really like go around and water each one and see if it has bugs, see if it's happy or not. So that's something I recommend from time to time, even if you have a good system. Okay, light. Most succulents prefer filtered sunlight or a limited amount of hours a day. Although some will tolerate all day sun, most will look best with some relief or limited hours of direct sun. They will need less frequent watering if they have a bit of shade. With not enough sun, your succulents will stretch out. This is called foliation, and I'll show a picture of that. But with too much sun, they can really quickly dry out. They can get too stressed. They can sunburn. So there's, like with any living thing, it's a balance, right? So here's examples of not enough sun. So you can see this aloe right here. See how it's very pale in the new growth? That's because it's not getting enough bright light. Whereas these parts of the leaves when they were getting more sun are nice and dark and rich and have texture. Also, this aloe is really open. It's not the normal way it should be growing. And the reason it's doing that is it's actually trying to increase its surface area to get more sun. So it is like opening as much as it can to get as much light as it can. So that's not good. It's not going to be, the leaves aren't going to be strong and sturdy. Whoops. And then this is an example of a foliation where the leaves are going to space out, and you're also going to get a weak stem, and you're not going to get this beautiful dense rosette like you want. Let's see. Oh gosh, this is embarrassing. My computer is looking like it's going to die. So 1 second. Michelle, maybe you can see if there's any other questions while I grab that.
Okay. Sorry for technical difficulties, everyone. Just 1 sec. And now's a good time to maybe filter in some questions you have, and when she comes back, we will answer some.
Sorry about that. I thought it was fully charged.
You're back.
Okay.
We have a few questions we want to go over right now.
Okay, great.
We have one question asking you, when is best to water, morning or sunset?
Oh, that's a good question. I wouldn't worry about it too much. Morning is probably the best time, just because then your succulents have longer to start drying out before it gets cold and dark. But especially during warm months, it's not as big of a problem. I kind of water at all times. Sometimes you don't want to water if it's like the middle of the day at noon, if it's like really hot and really bright. It could, like on more sensitive plants, it could kind of burn them. But honestly, I've never really run into any major problems with that. But it is a good idea to do, like especially if you're gonna water in the winter, do it in the morning so it has time, like I said, to like dry out before it gets cold and dark. You're gonna reduce the risk of things rotting. Yeah.
Okay. Another question is, I think, related to one of your slides on the prior page. Is the
Okay.
second plant in the middle also from the lack of sun, the Echeveria, she believes?
Oh, is this from a lack of sun?
I think that might be it.
Okay, yeah. Yes, this is
Second plant in the
all lack of
middle.
light.
Okay.
Oh, in the middle. So sorry, I didn't explain that well. This is what it should look like. This is what it looks like with not enough sun. So it looks like a completely different plant. So these are the leaves, nice and condensed together. It's a nice rosette shape. It's tight, and then it starts getting long and skinny because just like with this aloe, it's trying to increase its surface area and its ability to get more sun in the middle of those leaves. So this happens. This is the most common thing I see happen with people growing succulents indoors. Their plants get long and skinny because they're reaching for the sun.
Yeah, it looks like mine.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. A lot of them, I always try to tell people, like, if you want to do them indoors, if just enjoy them, think of them like a bouquet of flowers that's really long term. And then if it starts doing that, try to put it outside, or if you don't have an outside area, give it to someone who does, because it's eventually not going to make it. It's going to get, the stem is going to get so long and thin that it won't be strong and it might break, and it's not going to bring you the joy it once did.
Okay, another question kind of related to that. Succulents are resilient, but at what point can you tell when there's no saving the plant?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, So when it's really hard, I always say it's better to underwater than overwater, because when things rot, there's really no coming back from that. Rot usually happens from the stem inside out. And so it's really hard to save a plant if that happens. If you do see that happening and the leaves underneath are mushy and squishy, that's rot. You want to get rid of those. And if it seems like the whole stem and the root system is rotten as well, if you have a tip, like let's say this tip of this plant was still firm and not rotted, you would chop that off and propagate it. And that's how you could save that plant. When things are dry, you can, like similarly, you can do that, or you can just pull off the dead stuff and then put it in a bigger pot. That will help. A lot of times things get too dry if they're not getting enough water. So you could increase its soil size and just water it more often.
Okay. And the last question we have right now, should we worry about succulents when it rains? And do we need to move under an awning when it does?
If there's excessive rain, yes, definitely move it under an awning. But again, this depends on things like pot size. So if it was like a little teeny pot, I would say probably don't worry about it, because that pot's going to dry out so quickly that unless it's raining for like a week straight, then it probably won't rot. On the other hand, if you have, let's say you freshly repotted a succulent in a real big pot, and the pot's this big, but its root system is already only this big, then I would say yes, definitely that's going to be danger zone. Like, don't let that get too watered, because if you have this much root and this much soil, it's going to take so long for all of that soil to dry out that it could rot. So, but on the other, hopefully I'm not giving too much information, but on the other side of that, if you had a big old pot like this, but you had a succulent in there that's been in there for like 3 years and it's nice and full of roots, it's pretty tough. There's not a ton of soil to root ratio, so it'll probably be fine. Unfortunately these days, it's not too much of a worry because we're not getting a ton of rain. Because sometimes even when it rains, think about that too. You have a big pot. If it only is raining like this much, your whole plant's root system actually isn't getting wet.
Good. We have another question, but I think you're going to answer this in your future slides. Let's continue and we can go from there.
Okay, great. Yeah, just a couple more. So this is kind of a middle ground. This is when things are getting a lovely amount of sun. So this can add lovely dramatic colors. This is known in the industry as stressing a plant. So if you hear someone say it's a beautifully stressed succulent, it's going to mean that it's getting a little bit more sun than normal, causing it to have these like incredible colors. So these two are the same plant. This one with just a little bit more sun. Same here, same plant. This one is just way more purple. You can see on the one on the left, it's a little bit purple on the tips, but in more sun, it's just like super purple. And then with this one, same. Aloe nobilis is really green with a little bit of red tips, and then way more sun, it turns like almost completely orange. So this is a good amount. This is like perfectly fine. They're happy still. This, on the other hand, is too much sun, and they're not happy. So things can sunburn. So this is like a mild sunburn, and then here you can see they're very dark splotches. Those will never go away. You'll just have to like let the succulent outgrow that or peel those leaves off. Usually this happens when there's a drastic change. Usually plants won't burn unless you say have them indoors and then you move them out. It's really important to do that gradually because they will burn. So like if you had a plant in your kitchen window, it's getting long and skinny, it's not happy, don't just put it out in a bunch of sun. Put it out under an overhang, like against the house. And then every day or every couple of days even, move it a little bit more. Because it's, think of it like people. Some people, if you haven't seen the sun all winter and then you just go out all day, you're gonna get burned because your skin hasn't adjusted to that, right? So this, on the other hand, too, is an aloe that is so getting so much sun. Not only is it red, but it's actually curling in. So remember on that other aloe that was like, more sun, more sun. This aloe is actually like it's curling itself in. It's trying to reduce the amount of sun that is getting onto its leaves because it's just too much for it to handle. So this is a really good thing to be aware of in your garden. If something's doing this, or even if the leaves will on other things will actually cup, like curl up, all the same reason. So consider putting, you wouldn't have to necessarily move this completely. You could consider planting a shrub next to it. Or because even if the shrub is, a foot, 2 feet taller than this, think about the way the sun moves through the sky through the day. A plant that's here with a little bit of break, with a little tall thing here, when it gets to that later, hotter part of the day, it's all of a sudden in the shade. And that could be enough to make it happy. And then this is the last thing we'll talk about is actually planting succulents themselves. You can usually put them as far apart or close together as you want. They don't mind being crammed. Sometimes it looks better, and sometimes they even prefer it. The most important thing, though, is to be mindful of the depth that you place your succulent in the ground. If you plant it too high, the delicate flesh that has not been exposed to the sun, just like we were talking about, can burn. The plant can be unstable and break, and damaging that connection between the plant and the root system. So basically, if you're planting it too high and it's too top heavy, it can wobble. So you want to make sure you're planting at a height that is stabilizing it. But you also don't want to plant it too low because leaves that touch I'm using my hand as a plant. Can you tell? Let's say these are the leaves. If the leaves are like touching the soil, those leaves are just sitting on moist soil and they can rot. So that's not good either. So sometimes it's tricky to find a middle ground. If you're having trouble deciding and something's really heavy, but it's, if you do it any lower, the leaves will be in the ground. If it really is going to fall over, cater to the keeping it stable. That is the most important thing. If a plant falls, it's not going to make it. So that's the most important thing, is to keep something upright. You can also use stakes if it's something big. Use like bamboo stakes at a nursery, keep it from falling until it gets established. Dig a hole no more than double the size of your plant's roots. The same goes for potting. When I pot something up, I usually don't go more than double the size that it was before. Wow, those birds are going crazy. And they will tolerate losing quite a bit of their roots, and they'll still thrive. So like I said, I chopped off some of those aloe to get them to fit in a pot. So the point is don't worry if some of the roots break when you're potting them. That's why, again, these are so great to experiment with, because if it's something feels awkward, and something falls off, like, you really don't have to worry, which is awesome. Yeah, so I think that kind of sums it up. So are there any other questions?
Yeah, some people feel free to filter in some more questions. We had one more. Can you talk about succulent types suitable for outdoors all year long for the Bay Area? I heard not all types are good for outdoors, such as winter temperatures.
Oh yeah. There are a few things that I mean, if like, I guess most of you are probably in Hayward. Unless we're gonna get a freezing night, you don't have to worry too much. Certain things like echeveria, especially like the big juicy ones that have a lot of water in their leaves, those can be prone to rotting. Some agaves. It's all basically, my answer is look it up. Most of them will be fine. But it's really usually some of the like more pretty hybridized ones that are more delicate. And it varies family to family. So like some agaves are good, some agaves are bad. So it's like very species specific. So like the big century plant agaves are like totally frost resistant, while the smooth ones are not. So it varies plant to plant. But there are things you can do if you really love something and you want to try it and you're afraid it will freeze. Well, I always say during the winter, like for me, I watch the weather, and if it's like predicted to possibly get below freezing, you can either, if it's in a pot, you can move it close to your house under an overhang. It's things that have an overstory, or like if it's under a tree, just having something over the top of it will keep things from dropping as cold as if they were just like out in the open with no trees over them, right? So you can like put a sheet over it for that night or something like that. So I would say just look up each plant to make sure, because most will be fine in our climate.
Okay. Any suggestions for great places that have a variety of succulents or cuttings in the peninsula? And I know you sell your own too, so feel free to mention that.
Yeah, I do some like little small scale cutting grab bags, where I just kind of give you a variety of stuff from my garden that you can try propagating yourself. I'm familiar with more of the nurseries around the Oakland, Berkeley area. There's also in Walnut Creek, there's an amazing place called the Ruth Bancroft Garden. They have a very good selection of plants, as well as an epic succulent garden. So I recommend, if you have not been there, it's called the Ruth Bancroft Garden. It's like $10 for a tour, and you just walk through. It's a whole acre of just the most amazing succulents, cacti, protea. They have a lot of what are called cycads, which are like almost like palm-like plants that store water in their trunks that are just, it's great. And everybody there is lovely. So I recommend there. And the Cactus Jungle in Berkeley. And where else? Yeah, I would just look up. I mean, I feel like all nurseries have kind of like a different assortment. So just look up nurseries in your area. I think most will cut, like, because succulents are so popular, will carry some. Probably not as much as we go into winter. I notice people don't get as many shipments in. So if you're gonna buy some, I would say go soon before they stop carrying them for the season.
Okay, and we have how do you get succulents to bloom or flower?
Some people are very strict with fertilizing, so that can help do that. There are a few kinds of fertilizer. I use a slow release pellet called Osmocote. You can buy that at some nurseries. It's usually in a big bag though. It's good because it's mild. So basically you want if you're going to use fertilizer, use anything that's just very mild. Some people use, what is it called? Oh, it's funny. It has like a funny name, and it's basically like cow manure in little like pellets, like poo tea or something. It's like you put it in water and like make a broth and then water with that. But there are lots of schools of thought. I would recommend only fertilizing in the spring and summer though, because like I said, most succulents are not actively growing in the winter, so you are kind of like fighting it if you do that. Otherwise, I would say when they're happy and healthy, they bloom. So like, I don't do that much fertilizing. I just kind of let them do their thing. So some will also flower more often once they're more mature. Like I had a couple succulents that I had for 3 years before they bloomed at all. So, and I didn't even know they bloomed, and all of a sudden they bloomed, and it was like really exciting. So, patience, patience and health.
Important.
Anything else?
Yes, we have one other question. Do you design for residential landscapes? And if not, do you have any recommendations of where to get that kind of service?
Yeah, I do like small scale since it's just me. So like small areas, usually not like a full yard. There are some people, I don't know their last names because they're like acquaintances. I have two. If you email me, I will find out their information for you because I don't know their like contact and their full business name off the top of my head. But okay, I do have resources for you. Anything?
And what is your email again? As I have it.
Oh yeah, it's it's just westwindsucculents@gmail.com.
There you go. I'll send it to them. Okay, and another question: how would you monitor or control the growth of succulents? This person has some tree house leek, big mother plant plus a lot of babies that are not pretty anymore, and aeonium plants that line up with the garden but grow at a different pace, and I'm not sure why.
Okay. Yeah, that could be for a lot of reasons. Aeonium, I find, tend to like a little bit of a break from the sun. So when they're in too much sun, they're gonna like drop a lot of leaves, and a lot of times the stems will not be long and skinny, but you'll have like more stem to like flat to rosette ratio, and then they'll like kind of curl up at the tips, and that's usually because they're in too much sun. I find they're the happiest when they're in like a bit of each. So that could be the problem. Like maybe the aeoniums like and aeoniums get really big too. So it's hard to say, but a good way to monitor is just, I like to always say, if you have dead, dry leaves, like just make sure to be adamant about when you see them to clean them off. A small amount is normal growth, normal shedding while things are growing. But it's a good way to tell, just clean them off, because then if all of a sudden, like a week later, you have a ton more, then you know something's not right. Like they're not happy. They're getting not enough water or too much sun or both. When things are in a lot of sun, you're going to have to water them more, right? Because they're going to dry out faster. They're going to be struggling more. Send me a picture and I can tell you more.
There you go. And another question came up. Is there a different type of special outdoor soil that you need for succulents?
You don't necessarily need a special soil. Basically, like I said, the important thing is that your soil drains. So you can amend it with like, if you got a small amount of like good bedding soil and then maybe a little bit of pumice and lava rock, and then mix it into your natural soil, that's a good idea. You don't necessarily have to do that. If your soil is nice and well draining and it's your native soil that's been there a long time and you can dig in it easily and it's not super compact, then I wouldn't even worry about it. So it just kind of depends on the condition of your soil. but pumice for
Okay.
sure. Pumice and lava rock is good. Anything else?
We have another question. Can succulents stay alive in arrangements like pumpkins or wreaths?
Yes, that's a great question. I make a lot of those. And it's usually like a few months to a year, depending on the situation. So when a lot of times those are made with just cuttings. So the cuttings will over time start to root a bit into the moss, but at a certain point they're going to like outgrow just moss and they're going to want more nutrients and want to be put in soil. So what I always tell people about my wreaths is depending on like the light conditions they're in and heat, they usually, they'll last anywhere from 3 months to a year. And then when they start looking funky, you can just pull them off and plant them. So it's cool because you're kind of getting, I think of it like a really, really long-term floral arrangement that you then get to plant and keep growing. So yes, they will keep living, but you'll definitely have to like replant them.
Okay, great. We have answered all the questions for now.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any closing statements or anything you want to wrap this up?
No, just feel free to reach out with any questions. I do, custom arrangements for gifts, and I have a storefront right now in Oakland on College Avenue, and I have a lot of like pots and plants from my nursery and house plants as well. Yeah, so if you ever have questions about something that's wrong with your plant, let me know. Or if you need a gift for somebody or are getting married. I'm also doing more, especially because of COVID. I'm doing a lot more virtual classes. So, like for example, I'm doing a corporate a pumpkin class with Google, like a Google team. So I'm sending them all of the pumpkins, all of the materials they need, and then we'll have a Zoom hangout, and I'll teach them how to do that. So there's lots of possibilities. So if you ever want to do anything fun like that, let me know. But I think that's it. I hope this was helpful.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, I know there are a few questions about whether this class will be available online, and this webinar is recorded and it will be available on the Bosco website. And a link should be sent to you once it's available. Feel free to email us or email me directly if you need more. We didn't get access to that, but we can definitely help you out there. Thank you, guys.
Great. Yeah, thanks everybody.
All right, thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Good afternoon.